We are at the 2016 Honolulu Surf Film Festival, and this was the night that Anna Trent Moore was going to give her talk story session on Bud Browne. But in reality, it is the story of Anna Trent, daughter of surfing legend Buzzy Trent, and hanai, daughter of Bud Browne, surf filmmaker. This is Anna's story.
Thank you for those kind words, and mahalo everybody for being here. And yes, I did come from California for the film festival, but first and foremost, I always call myself a makaha girl. Always have been, always will be. So even though I reside in California, most of the time Hawaii is always my home. And it is always a joy to be here to share in the film festival. I had a wonderful afternoon with Taylor Chang, and we were talking about storytelling and how the film festival shares storytelling of the sport that we dearly love at its finest. And it is always a pleasure for me to come and talk story and do storytelling. So I think what I'll do is show the film first, and then afterwards we'll have a talk story, and I'd like to share on who Bud Browne was, what he did, and why his work is relevant today to surf. Thank you.
We watched a 30-minute film on Bud Browne's story and his foray into the surfing films arena. And now we will go back to Anna Trent Moore and her personal history with Bud Browne.
When I look at the film, I'm not only looking at people that I treasure inside of me, or my father did, but I also remind myself that I'm looking at it through Bud's eyes and what he saw and what he preserved for all of us. Thank you. Thank you. I was fortunate this year to come to Oahu for a little bit of El Nino. And I was at Waimea one day, and there was a big swell. I think there was a big swell every day this winter in Hawaii. And I was watching the surfing, and it was spectacular. And I thought about how faces come and go. Every person has their time, and it all passes. But one of the things that come and go and come again are the waves. And so when I look at the films and I see Butch and I see John and I see Duke and I see Buzzy, I remember that each time has their time and they're all precious, and that our time now is possible because that their time was before us. And so I'm very grateful for that. I'm very fortunate in that I grew up with two amazing storytellers my whole life. One was my father, Buzzy Trent, and the other was Bud Browne. Buzzy Trent was my birth father, and he was a prolific storyteller. He told his stories orally, often and many times. And Bud Browne, who I was hanai to in many ways, he never married or had children, told his stories through the films. And I was talking to Taylor about storytelling today, like I was saying earlier, and in all indigenous cultures, there is a job bequeathed to someone who is responsible for the storytelling and the passing of the stories. Because if we don't do that, our stories will be washed away by the tide. And without sounding any bit of arrogant, I like to say that these two men entrusted me with their stories. And so I feel very compelled to share them, polish them, preserve them, and to make sure that they shine bright so that you and the others that follow will be able to learn and treasure and be happy from them. Bud Browne is known in surfing as the father of the surf film and creator of the surf film genre. But first and foremost, he was a man of water. His life as a man of water began as a swimmer. And it was a chance encounter in a swimming pool at the Los Angeles Athletic Club with Duka Hanamoko,
in 1934 that inspired a journey on the Mariposa's maiden voyage in 1938, where he came to Hawaii for the first time. And I don't think he surfed. He wasn't even filming surfing. Instead, he was frolicking on the beach, filming Duka Hanamoko, who he became friends with, joined the Waikiki Surf Club, and had a wonderful time, where he stayed at the Tropicana Inn, which was very reasonable, eating his favorite salad dressing, the Tropicana salad dressing. I don't know if it's still around, but he loved it all his life. I'd have to buy it and bring it back for him. And that is where he first fell in love with Hawaii Nei. Following that, shortly, World War II broke out, and Bud joined the Navy. And I always found it ironic, and such a paradox, that during this horrific war, he was touring the Pacific Arena, seeing the most beautiful islands of his life that would stay with him forever. Papayete, when there were only 2 taxis, Bora Bora, which he said was the most beautiful place on earth, and of course, always Hawaii Nei. After the war, he returned to California, finished college, became a teacher, and he filmed an 8mm for fun. He would film surfing, show them to friends, and they just loved them. And he decided that he wanted to take filming a little more seriously, so he bought a Bell & Hauser camera and began filming surfing in 16mm. At first, they were films that he would just show at clubs or someone's house. And then eventually, he decided to return to USC and pursue a master's degree in film editing and take it seriously. And it was around 1951 that my history with Bud Browne begins. He said he was at State Beach and he heard someone speaking in rapid fire sentences behind him about sailing to Hawaii, to this place called Makaha, where he would find the biggest wave and he would surf it. Bud turned around and he said that was the first time he saw Buzzy Trent. And my father did sail to Hawaii, and he did find the biggest wave he could find, and he rode it. He rode many of them. And Bud Browne followed him in the winter of 1953, where he lived with my father in a Quonset hut, and he filmed wonderful, spectacular, big Makaha point surf, and decided to make his first surf film. Following that, he went on to make 13 more films. And I guess the rest is history about that. He took a little break in the mid-60s to do something he had always wanted to do, which was to make a love letter to the place that he loved perhaps most of all, Tahiti. And he made the film, You'll Dance in Tahiti. And he showed it 2 times, and then he put it quietly away, and he went on to film surfing. I've heard from some people that surf history is fading, and that not everyone is so interested in it. And it sometimes that gets me a little discouraged, but only for a moment, because I don't believe that's true. I think that it is the responsibility of those that hold the stories to polish them and wait and be patient and hope that those that eventually come will open up to it and want to hear it and want to see it. And so that's why I do what I do, and I take Bud's films and I share it and I polish them and I open the door so that people can see them and remember where we come from. This film that I did was a way for me to marry my writing with Bud's film. I'll never forget, a long time ago I was toying with this idea of writing a book, my first book, which was the Buzzy Trent story, Increments of Fear. And how Bud and I would patiently sit at his little viewfinder, looking at films and looking to find pictures and frame grabs. And I put it away for a while, many years in fact, and was never able to follow through with it. And so it was really fun for me to make this film that you saw today. It's a short little film, because even though he wasn't alive to see it, I was able to marry what I could do with what he did, which was the writing and the film. So I'm really glad that you got to come and see it today, and I'm always very proud to share. If there are any questions, I'd love to answer any questions about Bud and the film and the footage.
And I have a question for you. So I think in text on the film it was claimed he spanned more epics or more eras than any other filmmaker living or past in history. So I'm adding it starting what, around 52, 53? Tell me the years from when he started to when he stopped with going surfing, was it, by the way?
Professionally, he filmed his first surf film in 53. However, the very first film he made was for a film docudrama person named George Tahara. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of George Tahara. George Tahara made many films on Hawaiian history and Hawaiian docudramas. And shortly before he passed away, I was asking Bud about his first surf film, Hawaiian surf stories, and he said, no, my first film was actually a travelogue for George Tahara. And I asked Peter Kolobud, and he said, oh yes, he had seen it sometime, and I think George Downing and Wally are in it. I don't know where that film is, but it's probably somewhere in the George Tahara archives, which I hear some of its housed at the University of Hawaii. Yeah.
So what would the range be when he started? What was the final film? What year would that be?
Well, he filmed an 8mm in the 40s. I would say he did George Tahara's film in 48, and I would assume George Tahara asked him because he had seen some of Bud's work. So I can't say for certain because Bud's not here, but I do have an 8mm film that is very, very old, and I believe it's probably from the early 40s. He also filmed, you know, Bud lived almost 100 years old, and we know him as a surf filmmaker. But I think when you live almost 100, he was 96, you have many different epochs in your life. And it was the same with Bud. We know him as a surf filmmaker, but he was dabbling in filming 8mm years before that. He filmed the California coastline. That golden time of California where lobsters were as big as me and abalones were ginormous, not only on film, but he photographed it quite prolifically. He also photographed and filmed Tahiti quite prolifically. That's a whole other genre of his work, which I'm convinced the world would absolutely love. His portraits of early Tahiti during a very innocent time, and also the golden California period, the whole coastline where he traversed up and down when he was a diver. So if you were to break Bud's work as an artist, as a photographer, as a filmmaker, you can actually break it up into 3 sections. Oh, and there's also his swimming time. He was a swim captain for USC in the 30s, an amazing swimmer. And he also photographed that period, the early California swimmers at USC and, oh gosh, Johnny Weissmuller, all the swimmers of that epic time too. Oh, and the swimming pool swimmer, what's the name? That whole amazing, wonderful time in the 30s, beautiful. So honestly, it's hard curating and archiving such a large body of work. You could spend 3 lifetimes categorizing and organizing Bud's work. I choose to focus right now on the surfing, which is a huge body. When I say that he documented surfing longer than anyone, there were people that were documenting surfing early in believe some in the 30s and the 40s, like Doc Ball. But Bud was the first commercial surf filmmaker. And I think what's amazing about his work is the film he captured of early Makaha in the early 1950s. He captured it from a vantage point that we call Together the Man-Made Pool. I think some of you might have read about this. I'll tell a little story again. If you go to Makaha and you see the bend in the point, you'll see a house with a porch that protrudes out long and there's pillars underneath. And my father always told me the story. We call that house the rich man's house because he had the fanciest house of all of Makaha, and he built this beautiful home that no one even had a house like that in Makaha. And it's right there at the bend of the point where the waves would come around, wrapping around the big swells. And if you look below it, there is a large reef swimming pool. It's quite magical. We swam in it as children, and I think children still swim in it today. We called it the rich man's house because the man who built the fancy house wanted a natural swimming pool in front of his home, so he dynamited a hole in the reef. Well, I know. But I would tell people that story and they wouldn't believe me. They'd say, "Are you sure somebody get arrested? They'd be in prison for that." And I guess it was true because years later, I was, after my father passed away, I saw a little lot for sale there and I called a realtor. And before I hung up, I gave him my email, which is the Man-Made Pool. And he said, "Wait, you know there's a house by the point there." I said, "Yes, I know it." He goes, "Well, if you look below it, you'll see this large pool." I said, "I know it well." He goes, "Well, years ago, a man dynamited a hole in the reef so he could have a natural swimming pool in front of his house." And I was stunned. I said, "Well, you just told me this story. My father used to tell me, and people just don't believe it when I tell them." And he said, "Well, believe it, it happened in 1934. Well, the Man-Made Pool, that's what Bud called it, and I called it. And if you look at the early footage of Makaha, it's always from a side vantage. And that's where he filmed it, from the Man-Made Pool. And that is, I think, of all his surfing, that is probably, in my heart, the greatest treasure. I know toward the end of his life, Bud was a Californian, but I would say his prolific body of work, over 75% of it is from Hawaii. And toward the end of his life, when he reflected on the best of his life and his work, the place that he reflected on always was Hawaii. And it was either Makaha or Pipeline and Waimea. Toward the end, when we discussed, he was very ill, and we discussed where we would scatter him, the two places that he wrestled with were between Makaha and Pipeline. And I always found that interesting because Makaha was where it all began for him, and Pipeline was where it ended, because his last film that he made, or 16mm film that he made, was going surfing. We ended up scattering him at Pipeline because he decided Makaha was too hot. So we scattered him there, and where he's body surfing forever. It's always interesting when I go to film festivals, speaking of body surfing, because I know there was a body surfing film in the festival this year, and we had licensed film to it. But it's always a treat for me when I go to a film festival. I have yet to go to a film festival where there is not a film that has licensed work from us. Even if it's just one, sometimes it's more. But you can see that Bud's influence in filmmaking is still happening. If you need a historical base and you need something that's going to be from the 50s, or even the wedge. I mean, Bud was body surfing the wedge years ago. He has an incredible body of work in just body surfing. One of these days, somebody needs to make a true historical film on body surfing with real vintage film. But it's just so wonderful to see that it's still being shared. I think it's really important that whatever your passion is, that you know where it comes from, that you know the history of it, that you celebrate the history of it. I think that is when you can get a true appreciation for what your passion is. Sometimes I worry in surfing if today surfers really know how that yellow brick road was paved. And I think it's our job, those of you are obviously here because you're interested in history, to pass on that passion and to share. Because we don't do it alone. And even before Bud, there were the Hawaiians, and I wish we had films of that, and we don't. Of course, the Hawaiians created surfing. We need to celebrate that more. There's so much more I want to know. I want to know more about George Freeth. I want to know more about the times that appear to be washed away from the tide, but maybe someone knows something from someone who told them, from someone who told them. That it's very important to keep the history burning live. And of course, all stories to me are connected. It's all a circle. My father, Buzzy Trent, loved surfing big waves, but if you sat down in a room with him, Reed would probably know this, his good friend back there. Buzzy wanted to know who you were, what you loved, where you came from. He just found it interesting to talk to the Filipino laborer who couldn't even write his name and learn his story on how he came here on a boat. In fact, when I sat with my father, he rarely ever spoke about surfing. Did he talk about surfing all the time when you read? I don't.
We never once talked about surfing. How's that?
Never?
Never.
Yeah. Because surfing, I think surfing for him was a metaphor. I mean, it could have been, you know, people like George and Buzzy and a lot of those guys, you know, had they not been surfers, they would have been bullfighters, race car drivers, whatever. It's just that their vehicle became big wave surfing. But I think most big wave surfers that I have known are deeply philosophical, introverted, and many are very humble, the ones that I have known. So, any questions?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
I was fortunate enough to be raised by a father, our father, who was Nappy Napoleon. Not the Nappy Napoleon that's living today, but he was the beach boy Nappy from the Holly Colony Hotel. And so all of us siblings, we grew up surfing from a very young age. I started at 10 when I was in 1960s. And as we got older, we went to, how many of you remember going to Roosevelt Theater to watch Bud Browne surfing movies? Mm-hmm. They were the movies of our life. We were all surfers. We grew up in a surfing family. And so we look forward every time a Bud Browne movie came out. It was a big, huge thing to go from Kailua to town at night to go to a Bud Browne movie. So I have many, many fond memories of watching so many Bud Browne movies. I get emotional talking about it.
Well,
So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for sharing that. He really was a one-man show. When we say that Bud Browne created the surf film genre, literally, he took a leap of faith at the age of 40 to quit the secure job as a high school teacher to invent the career of a surf filmmaker. And he literally did it all. He filmed, he edited it, then he would hand draw his handbills or posters in the very beginning and nail them to every telephone pole he could find. Then he would sell the tickets for 65 cents at the door, collect the money, race to the projector, run the projector while he narrated it live. And that's how the surf film was born. And then he would tour it up and down the coast in California, or he would come to Hawaii and show it at Roosevelt, McKinley, or whatever intermediate auditorium will let him do it, and just share the stoke. I cannot tell you how many people I've spoken to that say, yeah. I'll say, okay, well, what brought you to Hawaii to surf in the 60s or the 50s? They'll say, it was Bud Browne's film. I don't know if I should say that because so many came, but they will say they were inspired to come. And it was, he was such an introvert, quiet, shy man. And he was anything. He was the exact antithesis of the subculture in which he captured, which were sort of like the James Deans of their time. And Bud was an ultra-conservative man. And he was, like I said, never been married, never had children, very reclusive, but yet it was interesting to me that he captured a time, a subculture, that were the little the rebels of their time. I remember I asked him once, what was it like back then? I mean, describe it to me. He goes, well, lots of surfing and lots of partying. I go, oh my gosh, because I couldn't believe Bud ever going to party. He goes, oh, not me. They were doing that. And there's so many funny stories, but I guess I'll tell you one about the John Peck. John Peck, I don't know if you remember which clip that is, but where he's riding Pipeline so beautifully. Well, the day before, Bud was renting a place at the North Shore, and Bud heard through the grapevine that there was going to be a party at his house that night. He was absolutely horrified, so he hid in the room all day while everybody came to Bud's house and had a giant party, and got very inebriated. It was kind of a very wild time, and the next morning, Butch and John Peck were passed out. Butch took off, and Buzzy and Bud come to find John, and they see John passed out on the ground, pick him up on either side of the shoulders and say, well, look at what you've done to yourself. Get out at Pipeline. Butch is out there already. So John goes back to Bill Bragg's house where he's staying and gets his board, goes out to Pipeline, and Bud is poised on the beach with Don James, and they capture that epic ride. And Butch and John's epic ride. I mean, it's an iconic picture, each of them an iconic picture that Bud made a frame grab of later. But every time I watch it, I'm just amazed that John could surf so beautifully that day, in spite of the fact that he had the worst hangover of his life. But it was a wild time, an innocent time, a good time. And you know, it's really great because I do run into some, like John Peck, and they're still surfing, and they're still cosmic and still doing well. And it's sad, we are losing some. Sadly, we've lost many this last couple of years, particularly it seems like. Some have had long lives and some have gone too soon. And when that happens, you say a little prayer, but you're grateful they walked the planet, and you're very grateful that Bud Browne preserved it. I think one of the great things he did, I think he had no idea the impact and the gift he gave to all of us. Whenever I would say any kind of praise to him, he'd just wave his hand and say, oh, such an exaggeration. But how wonderful it is that we can sit here, and like I said, all times pass and new times come. But we can sit here and we can look at Butch, we can look at Buzzy, we can look at George, we can look at John in the time of their lives and almost be there once again. And I think that's one of the great things that Bud Browne did. I could sit here and talk about the technicalities on how he developed the water housing so he could get the up close and personal shot. Or how he edited his films and all of that. But I think what I want to leave you with is the gift that he leaves behind, and to remember that we all need to remember to treasure our stories, to pass them on, and to value our elders, because at some point we're going to be there. Okay, and I think it's important. We have so much to learn from that. So without failing to be in the moment, We should always remember to honor the moments that have passed and what it's given us. So mahalo, yes?
The Tahiti film you mentioned, that was his favorite film about Tahiti. What was the name of it?
You'll Dance in Tahiti. None of Bud's films are transferred to DVD or available on the internet. At one time in the 90s, he did some films on VHS. Those have long been discontinued. The only time you can see a Bud Browne film is when we bring it to a festival. I get flack about that. At this time, it's not available any other way.
Bring the Tahiti film to the French Film Festival. It's French Polynesian.
God, I'm so glad you said that. One of my goals is to show that film. It's charming. It's when Innocent Time and the girls with the cinched-in Brigitte Bardot dresses and the scooters, and Papayete just looks like you so want to be there back then. Yeah, it must be shown. Yes.
I have a question about the film that's going to be shown on Sunday, Surfing the 50s. Was that put together in the 90s or something? Is that a recompilation, or what is that film?
Surfing the 50s. Bud would say that his last film he made was Going Surfing 2. But I've talked about it with Peter, we've discussed this. Really, his last film was Surfing the 50s. Bud had done all his films 16 millimeter. In the 90s, he decided to re-emerge out of retirement and make a VHS film. And this was great because he had made a film in such a long time, and so he decided to call on John Kelly and Peter Cole, and he flew them to California. They met in Bud's house, and Bud said, "Oh, Peter and John are going to be here. Do you want to come and say hi to them? They're good family friends." So I drove down and said hi to them while they were working. And what was interesting is, oh my gosh, what, 60, 70, 80, over 30 years had passed, and there they were making that VHS film, Surfing the 50s, exactly as they had done films in the 60s. And it was a compilation of what Bud felt to be the best of his 50s work. Now, I've looked over Bud's film often with him, and what Bud thought, and I thought the best of his work differed. But of course the surfing, and of course he would create the comedy skits, and he created these films of his time. But I think my favorite of Bud's work, which you see some in Surfing the 50s, are the lifestyles. The poignant vignettes that when there was no surf, he would be filming, or in between sets, filming the friends hugging or laughing or horsing around. There's much of the lifestyle that did not make it into Bud's surfing films. And I think that those are the gems of his collection. We always want to see the historical big waves. We want to see Epic Makaha. We want to see Pipeline in the early days. But I know that people are curious, what were they like? What were these people like? And so when you see these little glimpses into their private backstage life and moments, it really sheds light into the period in time. Surfing the 50s has some of that. And Peter will be here, all the friends, not all the friends, but many friends will be here. So I'm really looking forward to that. I hope some of you can make it this Sunday. You can good. Any other questions? Yes.
Just something I'm interested in is how Bud's work will be carried on to future generations, because I think that's really important. And
Thank you. So are you coming on Sunday? Okay.
That's Noel Jock Sutherland's sisters. Thank you, mahalo, Noel.
yeah, how Bud's work will be carried on to future generations. That's something I'm interested in. And the other one is a book planned on Bud and his surfers. A book planned on Bud and his surfers, you know, like what we're talking about today.
Oh, yes, a book on Bud Browne. There should be a book on Bud Browne. And it should be a big, fat, thick book, because there's so much to say about Bud Browne. Ron?
Yeah, quickly before you close out here, could you tell us about the book that's for sale?
Yeah, but I'm going to address this book over me. What would I do with Anna? Anyway, there should be a big book on Bud Browne. I don't know if I'm the right person to write it because, like I say, sometimes I'm so close to it. A big, condensed, autobiographic, quantitatively researched book on Bud Browne. Recently, a professor in France just wrote a film book, which he did a very large section in the beginning part on Bud Browne. But he is certainly worthy of his own book. And your other question was, what is being done to preserve the work for the future generations? Right, well, Bud, while he was alive, transferred, like I said, including Tahiti, he made 14 films. He only transferred 5 films. His body of work is a very large, prolific body of 16mm film. Much of it has not been digitized and transferred as of yet. We're doing bits and increments. It's a very costly endeavor, and we're still figuring out how to do that. And meanwhile, the film is just being protected and preserved until there is a way to transfer it. In terms of how it can be preserved for future generations, I haven't found the right place for it to live yet. I do share, I license film, I go to festivals, I do talks on Bud and his people. Sometimes I have to tell you, it is a daunting task. And I even question whether I am the right person to do it. I get scolded about it quite often. And until then, until I find a better solution, I will take the little steps, what I do, and find my way until eventually I find a better way. But one thing I do know is that I am very committed to preserving it and saving it and perpetuating it for future generations. I mean, I have to believe that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said, how much of the film, when you're reviewing it, contains audio, and how much was the filmmaker actually making with an intent to make that into a bigger narrative, or is he just documenting things as he goes along throughout it?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah. 90% of it's silent movie, and then, you know, the part that's got sound was the movie that was included the movies he released. That's where sound comes in. So there's some a combination of sound.
She wants you to stand up so they can hear.
Stand up, be heard.
Okay, so the majority, 90% of it is silent movies. So the sound was edited in later on when they narrated into the movies. But he also did some that had sound also included. But the majority of everything was at post-production, you know, into the editing process. I don't know if that, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and the second part was just whether he was shooting the footage with an eye to make that a bigger, like part of a bigger piece of the story, or if he was just documenting things as he
Well, I couldn't answer that question. I wasn't there to talk to him. I mean, well, I talked to him toward the end, but we didn't ask him that question. I think after his first movie and after he realized that people wanted to see his stuff, that was more the intent after 53 when he started making movies. I think it was more of a hobby he was going to use to capture it. And then finally he went to start seeing his stuff. So okay, every year he came out with movies, and all the way through the early 60s. And he would show them at Roosevelt High, like she was talking about. And we have that poster at Gun Ho where we're showing at Roosevelt High, as a matter of fact. Jill had a question about the era. So she told you at the beginning, but the closing, Bud filmed all the way into the mid-70s too. So Going Surfing was his last actual commercial movie that he showed. And he was in the process in his late 80s, early 90s of putting out a new Going Surfing, but there was a music issue, so he was going to re-edit it and put it out there, but he never completed that. So that's something, a project we may continue.
So there is an unfinished Bud Browne.
He also assisted with Big Wednesday as a filmer on that one too. And
That's
was
right.
probably his last active role in filmmaking, actual filmmaking, other than putting together that question on certain 50s. But that was footage, sorry.
My husband did want me to mention that if you're interested, I have written a new book. This is my 4th book. It's called Going Surfing, Profiles of Bud Browne's People. It's available online, and I think we brought 8 copies in the lobby if you're interested in buying the book. Originally, I was going to call this film 17 Surfers because I'm profiling 17 surfers, which is kind of ridiculous because Bud actually had hundreds of surfers. But I selected these 17 for the first part of the book because they were the surfers that Bud spoke about quite a lot toward the end of his life. So I wanted to honor that, and that's why I focused on them. But in Bud's life and film career, he touched many surfers, and many surfers touched him. So it's an ongoing right. So I can gather them all together and put them all together in one book someday. But we're starting in increments of writing, and it's called Bud Browne Surfers. So mahalo nui. Oh, yes?
You talked a lot about Bud Browne being such a good storyteller. And he's an incredible storyteller. And my friend Pooh and I came to the very first movie of the film festival on John Donne Flores, which had a part, everything was full in here. But we both came away with not liking that film because it didn't tell a story. It wasn't a good storytelling story. and it made me think of Bud Browne and what a tremendous storyteller he was. And the fact that that film didn't tell us any more about John Donne Flores as a human being. It just showed him wave after wave after wave, just riding waves. Unlike Bud Browne's film, which more round, more robust storytelling. So yeah, people, younger cinematographers and surfers need to look more at him to tell stories, to learn how to tell stories.
Well, there's definitely different ways to ride a wave and a different way to express it, and we are now at a time that there is a lot of slashing and turning and airing, and that in itself is quite extraordinary. I do appreciate what you said about the storytelling. Sometimes I wonder, because I'm so close to them, I know so many of these people personally as family, that maybe that's why I'm so much more connected to the stories. But I do think that people are interested in storytelling and surfing. And Bud Browne was a prolific storyteller. He tells the stories through film. And also, there's so much in the film that he captured in Hawaii that intrigues you to want to know more about the history of surfing. I want to know more myself. I mean, Bud was really a snippet of the great sport of surfing in Hawaii. There's so much more to know. But I thank you for that compliment for him. Wow. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it, and I hope to see you all again.